So we're here talking to Shelley Carroll about the state of current Toronto. I guess we'll start with the gardener. What do you think is the best solution for the gardener?
Well, what's happening right now, a lot of people think is inaction and delay, but it's one of the ways in which a city adds an extra layer to the environmental assessment process. That, you know, that's a policy in another government, but that's where cities have real control. When the environmental assessment about the eastern section, shall we take it down, whatever, came up, the option that a new owner of the Unilever plant came forward with, that wasn't an option in those days because it was kind of a hostile owner. There was difficulty going on there back when we made the decision to do an environmental assessment. So having had him come forward now, that's where cities get to take control and say, wait, stop. Just before we adopt this and pick an option, we need to review this fourth option because it just wasn't available to us at the time. And if it is, we're going to be able to use a lot of the work that was done in the environmental assessment to say we're going with this new option that wasn't available to us on the basis of the data collected during the environmental assessment. That's a solution that works for everyone. And you hope and pray that those are the types of things that will happen. Prior to that, I was in favor of taking it down. I drive that stretch. That's my stretch. And that is the least traveled part of the Gardiner. And so keeping it up is the most expensive to maintain because it's the highest part of the Gardiner. Really made no sense for the city.
If the Gardiner was to come down, there would be a lot of traffic that would be rerouted. What do you think is the best way to deal with that traffic in our current gridlock situation?
Part of the struggle that we've had since amalgamation is when you make a big citywide decision, the city is so huge that often people have a great say in the decision, and we're talking about a part of town they haven't been in, if not ever, haven't been to for a long time, and certainly don't go to regularly. And that's the trouble with the eastern section. By its very nature, being the least traveled section of the Gardiner, then on a percentage basis, if you look around the council, the least amount of councillors actually use it. Myself, Councillor Delgrand uses it when he takes his car, but he doesn't ordinarily. Councillor Min and Wong, a few others. A lot of the Scarborough councillors go down to the waterfront and come across. They've made new options. Most of us who travel the Gardiner, we're like every other Torontonian. I get off at Richmond and come into town. Western section councillors are not understanding because on that side of town, that's their only highway and it's their only option because the city of Toronto is such that the western section of the city is much broader and much more difficult to traverse. For us, the Don Valley makes the eastern section of the city somewhat narrow and with a number of different valves into town. That's a really difficult thing to explain to someone who never travels on our side of the city. So while we should make citywide decisions in the council chamber, this is one of those times when you're frustrated that there are people with real power over the decision who have no experience with the terrain.
With the Gardiner crumbling, are there other roads that you think now could be in a similar situation as the Gardiner in the future?
Well, across Canada really, elevated highways and bridges are ground zero for where do we spend infrastructure. We have to start there. Most of the major bridges, major elevated highways in Canada, not just Toronto, but in Canada, were built during the 50s and 60s. During those times, it was federal government we've decided to be a nation of urban centers. We're going to build cities. That's our post-war project. So post-World War II, they began to build these great, huge pieces of infrastructure. They helped us with the Bloor Viaduct. They helped us with the Leaside Bridge. They helped us build that elevated highway. The problem for federal governments is they love to build new things and put up a sign saying, your tax dollars at work. Renewal is not so sexy. It just gets repaired. It was there before, it's there today, it's just in a little better condition. And in fact, you get in trouble for the time during which we have to close off a lane. So the federal government of Canada in particular has sort of walked away. over time, across the globe, particularly in the Western world, federal governments, nations are realizing we have to renew our core cities or we start to fail economically. What's the real struggle in Canada is that currently we have a federal government who hasn't come to that realization yet. They'll tell you that they're spending plenty in cities, but in fact it's a tiny fraction compared with what they were investing back between 1955 and 1965. Tiny fraction. Yeah.
You mentioned working with the federal government. There's a lot that the provincial government could be doing. And you were very vocal during the Harris years about kind of, opposing his cutting Toronto agenda. Do you think we have recovered from the Harris agenda for the Harris years?
Well, we've done a lot in the last few years, and it didn't happen as fast as it should have. We had to still argue 3 or 4 years out from the Harris years. We were still, as a city, trying to address the issue of all of the provincial social services that's been downloaded to us. It's a similar argument to what I was fighting in the school board arena during the Harris years. I moved here just as we moved to a new government to City Hall. But we're still struggling, and I don't think Toronto is unique. We come off as unique because it's a more pressing problem here because we really are the center of poverty and struggle in Canada. But really across Canada, in every city, we're struggling with what is wealth distribution in a city, and what is a municipal responsibility, and what is economic revitalization, which means all three governments partner in it. We haven't really done that. Toronto ended up amalgamated because someone did a report that was literally titled "Who Does What?", meaning who should be doing what in this city. We've hit a population of 2 million. We're a different animal from anywhere in Canada. We're larger than Montreal by the entire size of Vancouver. So if you can picture those two cities together, they still don't make up the population of Toronto. And so they started looking at who ought to be doing what in this city and what's the governance system. Well, it's a long time since that report was written. It's almost 22 years since that report came out. And we're now approaching 3 million, and we still don't have the kind of financial structure, the kind of funding formula that cities our size and larger have anywhere else in the world. So there's still a struggle going on, but it's with both the provincial government, but particularly the federal government, because we got to remember that the structure of how we collect income tax in Canada is that a lot of money flows straight up to the top and then is transferred back down. The problem with the larger cities in each province, but particularly Toronto, is a lot of it flows up and never comes back to this city. So if you starve those large cities, what are you left with? Then your economic formula for your nation falls apart. That's the argument we keep making. What's encouraging right now is that in the last couple of years, we're making it in partnership with other cities. The Mayor of Vancouver, the Mayor of Calgary. We hope that things will soon be settled post-Charbonneau Commission in Montreal, that we're all arm in arm, including Mayor Coderre.
So do you feel that there needs to be more of an effort among big cities to work with the federal government in lobbying for that infrastructure? And what kind of infrastructure upgrades should we be looking for?
Well, there does need to be more effort amongst cities, but there needs to be a greater understanding that that's the issue amongst all Canadians, particularly those who live in urban centres. We have a great federation of Canadian municipalities. It's a great formula and it's a great lobbying vehicle, but the need needs to be pressing from the voter, and the voter has to start to realize that what happens in your city isn't all as a result of just your city government. People tend to compartmentalize governments in their minds as there's this federal government that does foreign policy, there's this provincial government that makes sure my hospitals run smoothly, and there's the city, and the city does everything else. in market polling, we've discovered that that's really the way people see government in Canada. It just isn't true.
They're implementing full-day daycare in our school system. Do you see that as a way of helping those families who need the daycare and can't afford it?
It helps that we're doing full-day kindergarten, but there's still the before and after care issue. Really, if you're going to make a seamless day for kids and you're going to make real healthy, you're going to build a real healthy care option, you got to be able to accommodate children from 7:30 in the morning to 6 o'clock in the evening. You also need, I have one of the most rarest things of all. I have a child care functioning out of a church in my ward that helps parents who work on shifts. They do nighttime daycare, and that's heroic work. But that's a real rarity. But we need to be providing that everywhere, but it has to be easy to understand, easy to access, and affordable. And you can say, well, we've got this subsidized system, and if you fill out this piece of paper and someone argues about you and you go from desk to desk, that in and of itself, keeping that system afloat, is costing a lot of money that should be going directly to the care of kids. Once you go to, as they have in Quebec now, a $7 a day system, you start marching towards a system where we're not going to be means testing and arguing endlessly. Either your family makes more than $40,000 or they don't. And if they make more, it's $10 a day. If they make less, it's nothing. But there have to be childcare options so that people can go to work. And once we decide that we're committed to that, yes, it's a huge investment up front, but there is no question that the economic benefit comes back tenfold.
With the solution, are there certain needs for, say, special needs children that they would have in a daycare system?
Exactly. And once you've really committed to that is the thing that is that is the thing that has to underpin your whole economic strategy nationwide. Once you've decided that, then it's no longer this huge Herculean task to say some of these kids have special needs and they'll need some accommodations. Right now, because we've made a really complex set of rules around how we fund and where we fund and who's running which, because we've got such a complex system, when you bring forward a child with real complexity, then you're really just throwing a little gasoline on the fire that is the funding mess of childcare. And so that's part of making this larger system. We've actually, in the last 15 years, have personal experience in this. We've gotten pretty good at accommodating special needs children in school because we have a universal acceptance that every kid is going to school. It's not an option to say, that kid's unique, I'm sorry, we can't accommodate him, get him out of here. Some may need smaller groupings, some may be integrated, but it's a given that we're going to do it, and we do it. The same thing has to be happening in childcare. And then you will find that because since birth, kids have been understanding that there are a million different kinds of people, including those with unique needs, you'll find a more compassionate society. They come out of the childcare system and out of the school system understanding that yes, some people have unique needs, and that's life, that's okay.
You have experience personally with the IEP system. Do you feel that it's a system that can be improved on, and how do we improve on it?
Oh, we're getting good at accommodating in there, but it's still a full-time job for parents. And as the child, some children can be very actively involved in their IEPs and some can't. But we're waiting for the child to show that they can be involved in it. We're not building a system that makes sure that they can. And my experience with it, with having a daughter with autism, is that even I didn't look for those signs. And so I just sort of uber parent motored her on through and was there to be an advocate. But there were key points, transitioning from elementary to middle, from middle to high school, those big transition years where I would walk into a room and there'd be a massive team of professionals. I'm a pretty high capacity person. I work in government myself. I understand how things can either work or not work systemically. And even I would sit in those big transitional IEP and I would sit there looking at all of these people around the table and think, what if I spoke English as a second language right now. This would be so daunting. I don't understand what half of you are saying. And I've got all the cards in my favor to be able to understand what half of you are saying. And so I've pushed back a number of times. I don't have any hesitancy about saying, that's ridiculous, that's mumbo jumbo. You're having a hard time explaining it to me. I don't have any faith that if she's in a rotating timetable, you're going to be able to make sure that 4 teachers understand what you're saying about how this program works. What's different from when my daughter was first identified and they said, well, we'll have to figure out where she goes instead of school. And I said, well, news for you, she's going to school. That was 20 years ago. It's very rare now that a school system says, well, your daughter's not going to school, let us tell you where she can go. That's much more rare now. It's a given they're going, but the IEP system still has a ways to go to tool up the actual child to manage their own file.
Are there things in City Council that you think could be done to better the TDSB in terms of the IEP system?
Well, City Council is full of people who've been in the school board. It's a natural function of municipal government. The 2 levels sort of work hand in hand. As that synergy that happens because the City Hall runs the school board is just a gift. There's a reason why in very large urban centers in America, that's the way it works. We're very good at advocating financially for needs, very good at governing in an urban way to meet urban needs. Having an arm's length governing body govern the School Board of Toronto and deal with some of these needs the same way they govern the 6 schools in Kapuskasing really kind of makes no sense. So I think we're hurtling towards that point in time where City Hall can take a really big role in this. Because we're going to end up at arriving at the realization we have to look at that model where municipal government is all one. The only thing really standing in our way in Ontario is the separate school system. That's a decision Ontario made a while ago. That's what stops us from saying we'll run the school board. There are 4 in this city, and they're all public. That's very complex. So some of those things will, I suspect, be discussed probably till about the population in the city is well beyond 3 million. But if you go back in the history of the city, you'll find that each time we hit a 500,000 mark, 1.5 million, we started saying, hey, wait a second, who are we? Maybe we need a 2-tier government and a metro level. We got beyond 2 million. It's not affordable. We're always broke. What's wrong with this system? We keep lurching towards a real big city government. And folding in the way we set our children up for success is a natural outflow of hitting that 4 million mark and on to 5 million. It's about that point in population that New York City went there, and a whole lot of other cities immediately thereafter.
Going back to how we invest in our neighborhoods, Toronto came out with some kind of report that designates cities priority neighborhoods, and this has replaced the neighborhood improvement area. How are those 2 strategies different, and how has things changed based upon them?
Well, it's the way they're going to be organized is a little different. Quite frankly, the way we're spreading them out, I have mixed feelings about the fact that a neighborhood that we struggle, where we struggle in my ward, the Peanut wasn't designated yet. This time, we're really going to be struggling because there's not a lot of cash up front coming from the city, and we're spreading it a little thinner, and we're moving out to other areas. So it's going to be a real challenge for those new neighborhoods, new designations. But really, we learn a lot each time we do them about how you do start to set up a neighborhood for success. And designated or not, there are partners out there who want to do this work in any neighborhood. I failed this time to get the Peanut designated as a neighborhood that needs these additional resources, because we went ahead and did the things you do as a result anyway. We have a community health center. Wasn't there when I was elected in 2003. But there were some great agencies that wanted one. I just had to facilitate their energy. There is a community food hub in the middle of the Peanut because hunger was the biggest issue. And there again, there was a network of agencies that wanted to do it, just couldn't find the space, and we facilitated that. Fought with city staff to get them a corner of a community center. So all of those things are coming along. 3 community gardens, a lot of programming going on there, brand new community center coming in. Some of the stuff you generate from becoming a designated neighborhood, I've just sort of learned from how they did it and done it anyway. So doing a place-based strategy, this one's slightly different, but it's still place-based strategy. When it's really good, and if all of the councillors are paying attention, it really does float all boats because they learn how to do things that we then can do anywhere you need to do it. And I'm hoping that that's what happens here. What's remarkable is that we came into the term of office that we're currently in, starting in 2010, terrified that we had a new administration that was going to wipe it all out and cancel it. They almost tried to, but failed. And all of the councillors began to, including the newly elected, to understand what it had been, the original 13 priority neighborhoods, what it had achieved. And some of them achieved and some of them didn't, but we went all through that. And here we are at the end of this term of office with a somewhat hostile political leadership still pressing on and honing and making improvements to it and designating new neighborhoods. I'm overjoyed with that. Yeah.
Do you see the infrastructure from the Pan Am Games as something that could possibly up our infrastructure in improving our communities? How do you see it being repurposed?
Oh, that was built into the plan from the very beginning. And there again, you got to learn from other people's mistakes. A lot of councillors have been around the world touring other people's past event spaces. And so you learn from those. There was lots of controversy around, for instance, the Vancouver Olympics. Their whole, they had a bit of a fiasco. You can Google it and look up the city being angry about the Falls Creek condominium project that started out as athletes' residences. But we learned a lot from that. In fact, went and spoke to them, and so some of those learnings have been built into the Athletes Village that's going to go on in downtown Toronto. We also learned that you can't just march in a sort of patriarchal way and demand to do whatever with the post-secondary institutions. Where the facilities like the Aquatic Center that's going into U of T Scarborough, facilities like that, where they're going in, we've gone in and said, what's your strategy? Where are you planning to go with this university in the future? We'd like to put a Pan Am facility here because we're supposed to spread them out, but what happens to it after? So the afterlife of each of the places was built in right at the beginning. And that we've learned from, Sydney way back when had some problems with making use of their Olympic Village after 2000. Lots of places like that told us, nail that all right up front. And so we didn't bend any rules. The Athletes Village is going up according to the official plan and meeting all the environmental requirements. And already before the athletes are even here, it's winning national awards for the way we've designed the parks and the commons around it and the way that we've built it right into what is our normal official plan anyway. No question, it's a very dense community, but it's going to have affordable housing units in it, market value units in it, transit flowing through it, and lots of quality of life space. That's what you want in any neighborhood. Past failures in Olympics and Pan Am Games, you got to bend the rules. It's Athletes Village. We now know you don't do that. Yeah.
Going back to housing and things like that, the Toronto Community Housing Corp. There's been a bit of an issues in terms of getting proper housing for people. People are living in housing that isn't sufficient.
Yeah.
Things like that. How do you think we could be improving meeting those needs of people in community housing?
We have a terrible community housing corporation. Not shifting blame when I say part of the problem is the model imposed on us is wrong, but it is. It starts from the model itself. The responsibility was handed over to the City of Toronto, but again, no financial formula to support it. And so we're doing the best we can. And the problem is, when you're down to beyond skeletal funding and just plain inadequate funding, there's only so hard you can push on the people that are left to run it. And so really what we've seen is it's about 15 years now of some shining victories in places. Regent Park revitalization that's being replicated around the city now is a great example of building our own solution to the problem of not having any capital funding to run a housing corporation. But in the existing places where we're not doing revitalization, we have got a corporation that it's just shocking to me. One of the few responsibilities I haven't had yet on the city is sitting on the Toronto Community Housing Board. It's an ambition of mine in the next term if I'm honored enough to be reelected. But I got to tell you, it's just the on-the-ground, day-to-day management that just burns out in every location you put it in. Put people in, and they're so under-resourced and so struggling that there's just this constant, adversarial relationship between tenant and the people we're sending to manage the place. And if we're not taking care of it, why would they? Why would they? I've been fighting that since we started pulling caretakers out of schools. Okay, somebody dropped a juice box in the corner. I get it. But if there's no caretaker there to pick it up, why would any kid pick it up? So by lunchtime, someone's dropped some more garbage on it. On the way back from lunch, somebody's really mad that that garbage is still there, and so he's urinating on it. Why wouldn't he? Because we have no respect for the facility that we put there. Why would anybody else? In revitalization, we're trying to build in that respect for it. And that's, again, an international model. London, even during the years of Margaret Thatcher, who was a uber conservative, didn't even like providing housing, she said, just work on how do we make them want to take care of their homes. You know what they found out? Build the homes better. The home is better. High quality building materials, don't cheap out. Make them feel like you really want them to be in a good place, and they'll want it to be a good place and they'll maintain it. That's what we're trying to do in the social housing revitalization. They'll pay you back with the way they maintain that home.
There's a lot of grassroots movements within the city for more sustainability and more community gardens. How does the city go about supporting those groups?
Community gardens is a great thing. It's very expensive for us to run and maintain a community center, but so we're strategic about them. In some neighborhoods there isn't one in walking distance because we can't build them on every corner, but a community garden can pop up on every corner, and it's low risk. Because the beauty about it is a community garden is a renewable resource, and it's also a resource that's easy to eradicate. If no one wants it anymore, if the garden organization falls apart, okay, dig it up, flip it over, and put the sod back. It's back to a park. So you can make the leap. With the weakest of group together, we don't really know what a community garden is, but if you help us, we'll try one. We just always make the leap. If a small handful of people want to try it, we let them try it, give them the space. Most councillors do anyway, because if it doesn't work, we'll just make grass again. It's no big deal. So usually when you say that to residents, they go, oh, then you as a person of some note in my community are not going to look down at me or disrespect me if this doesn't work. No, hell no. Go ahead. I'll just make it back into grass. That usually liberates them, and before you know it, you have a community garden that ain't never going away. That's what we have at Dallington. It's what we have at right in the heart of the peanut at Advent Lutheran. I said at the beginning, I don't care. I'll fix it for you if you don't like it. And so all they need then, one animator, and it's a relatively small department in our Parks and Recreation staffing. One fabulous guy, Solomon Boys, runs the program, and he has a few animators, and they're able to work on a number of different gardens. He keeps it going. It's a lot of work, but it's pretty affordable work. And on a bang for your buck basis, he could take the same staff member and say, go run a badminton class in Pleasant View, and he'd be dealing with 16 people a few times a week. Go run a community garden with a waiting list of 600 gardeners who come by for the potluck and love this place, and the whole neighborhood walking through it and enjoying it. We get huge quality of life bang for our buck. Just one animator saying, I'll help you build this garden. So it's the cheapest and best thing going. Yeah.
How do we support these gardens in the winter when, it's hard to grow things and it's hard to deal with things? How do we do this in the winter?
Well, what I always tell groups going into it, hold your group together. First of all, ones where we have a partnership, we have one in Darlington Public School in Ward 33 that is a partnership with the school. So they don't just walk away from the garden, turn the soil and walk away. They plant winter cabbage and things like that in it, because the school continues to walk out into the community garden area and talk to the kids about what do you do in the winter? What do farmers do in the winter? What do we think pioneers did in those days? So they continue to use the space. But for those that it may be in another space and nothing happens there in the winter, what we do, one of the ways that councillors facilitate is help what's a relatively low-resourced group. They don't have a lot of funds, so a councillor sponsors space for them. We say to them, keep getting together all winter long. Bring your core group together socially, so you continue to be there as friends. You talk about what you're planning to do next year. Keep a vision going. And so it's another one of the ways that we can make sure that community stays engaged with one another, even in the winter. Because that's always the challenge in Canada and a lot of neighborhoods, and particularly for me, in suburban neighborhoods. Once people head inside and our lots are larger, we're not cheek by jowl the way downtown dwellers are, you lose that connection with community, and then you have to rebuild it again in spring with certain events. If you can keep those community gardeners together and you've got a few of them around your ward, you have a core group of people that are used to talking to each other, used to contributing, and they sort of generate that enthusiasm amongst the others too as soon as we do launch the garden back up in the spring. Yeah.
So we've had a long winter, and there was that massive storm, and I think in Toronto wasn't really prepared for that. How do you think we could have better prepared for a disaster like the Toronto snowstorm?
We could not prepare for what happened. An ice storm. Ice storms are this very special, completely insidious type of event. They're created by a really specific set of meteorological conditions. A typhoon is blowing ashore. You can turn on CNN and hear about it for 3 days as it's arriving, and you know what a typhoon does. An ice storm, you can know that there's going to be some freezing rain, but in the right set of conditions, it lands on the ground, the roads are slippery, and then we're done. When you get this specific type of thing, that it actually starts to come down in a very, very heavy yet not raining mist and landing in freezing conditions and accumulating on every piece of vegetation or structure, that's a still somewhat rare thing and extremely difficult to prepare for. And so really the way we recovered from it, people are underestimating how major an event that was. We didn't sit in Toronto when it was taking like a month to recover from the Montreal ice storm a decade earlier and say, what's wrong with those people? Why can't they get their act together on the third day? We didn't say that outside our city limits because it was such a big thing. But when you're inside it, you're just feeling like, fix this, fix it now. I want this fixed. We really all were like small children. We didn't understand why it was taking so long, but there were good reasons why it was taking so long. I sit on the Toronto Hydro Board, so I've been in more technical briefings than I care to be as to why first they had to do main feeders and then go out to streets. And in going out to fix streets, they sometimes found, wait a minute, we have to go back and turn the feeder off. We can't take this neighborhood live yet because there's danger here. And now this guy can't fix what happened on the street until we go back and turn that off. There were all sorts of technical reasons, and some of them that we can prepare for. Where we fell down was not in how we dealt with the electricity itself, but the mental tasks that have to take place in the emergency office, we still have a problem here where if we decide we're not declaring a state of emergency, if we decide a tone for how we're going to manage this emergency on day one, there was a real reluctance. I had a sense of it being outside the office, but reaching in, there was a real reluctance later on to say, we've re-examined, we're now declaring. When the June 2014 report comes to Toronto City Council, you're going to see a lot of pressure on the city manager to admit that that's the one thing still missing from our preparedness, is the ability to re-examine ourselves mid-crisis. Yeah.
So how do you think we could prepare to help those people in, like, the people who are vulnerable in the situations where there is a massive storm, not as necessarily massive as the Toronto storm that recently happened, but just a flood or...
Well, it's just resources. If you have resources, you can do it. You need a lot of money, and it needs to arrive quick. That's why declaring a state of emergency would have taken the question of money out of it. Once you've declared a state of emergency, you just deal, and we sit down and do the finances after. That's the agreement at that declaration point. That's why we outside councillors who are on the ground, standing in the cold living rooms, were asking for it. But you also, at that point, you do call the armed forces. Damn it! If you have people that you need to reach and you can't, it's one thing to have warming centers, but what if you can't get the people there? And there are places where you can't put warming centers because those neighborhoods are still in crisis. How do you move those people out of the neighborhood in crisis and take them to the place? I had isolated seniors who didn't know that we had used generators to set up a warming center in a neighborhood that was really largely still blacked out. So they were 6 blocks away, frozen, hungry, sleepless, and didn't know that if they had just called a cab or Wheel-Trans, they could have gone to Pleasant View Community Center and been warm right through Christmas. That's a tragedy. So how do you start to connect? I've sat down with some of those residents, talked to them after, well, what did you do? Well, a couple of times I went over to Fairview Mall and warmed up. Why in God's name are we not saying to giant facilities like that, like Fairview Mall and big box grocery stores who by law must have a generator because they're over the legal limit for square footage of refrigeration, and so we require them to have a generator? Okay, you have a generator. You might not be able to open for business, but your lights are going to be on. You're where we're going to post information. People are probably going to drive over to Fairview Mall to see if they can get in to warm up. Why wasn't there a table there telling people where the warming centers were in that neighborhood, telling people where to go to charge their phone and such? I was lucky. Cadillac Fairview, that runs that mall, was generally accommodating. They just sort of loosened up the rules. If you sat down in a corner because you saw an outlet and so you sat there with your 3 kids charging your battery, they didn't say you're not allowed to loiter here. They just let it happen. So it became de facto the biggest warming center in the neighborhood, but it was not handing out information. I was walking up and down Fairview Mall saying hi to anybody I knew was from my neighborhood to say, do you know Pleasant View's open now? Hi, how are you? Is the power on? Did you report your street? Why weren't official people doing that? So which brings us to the next question. I've got 9,000 Twitter followers, and I don't even know how many people are on my Facebook. How come they weren't using me? I was using me. I did a lot of blackout work on social media. And the reality is, whether you like the politicians or not, public service and emergency response teams, whether you like the politicians or not, they're there, they have followers, and they have some information. Give them more information and give them assignments. I thought of going over to Fairview Mall and giving people information, so I went. Tell us to. Tell us all to. Give us a piece of paper and say, take this, don't veer off this sheet, but I want you to tell people these things in your area. Put me to use. Have me copy it onto my 9,000 follower Twitter feed. These things are coming up not just because of our blackout, because of Lac Megantic, because of the flood in Calgary. In the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, we're starting to say to all levels of government, municipal politicians are on social media. In a crisis, give us an assignment.
Do you think that being on social media has changed the way City Hall works?
Yes, it's made us more nasty. No, it has, in the service respect, yes, but it is making people more accountable. It's the mayor was immediately accountable. Within a nanosecond the other day, people knew that he had voted against looking at a place to have something called Nelson Mandela Way in a nanosecond. And granted, it was the wrong way to go about it, but 35 minutes later, he realized he was in trouble and came back and said, I got to change my vote. Oh, okay. Yeah.
So I guess that's all for today. This is Councilor Shelley Carroll.